Let's speak to our special guest this week on Erskine Veterans Radio, because it's somebody I've been talking about quite a bit actually in the lead up to this, saying I was looking forward to hearing from him. And Bill McDowall is the head of IT and a proud Erskine Cottage resident for 25 years. His military career, as you'll hear, involved being deployed to the Falkland Islands for the Falklands conflict. And during that conflict, he was involved in some of the biggest and most significant battles of the Falklands campaign. And after that, really life took a turn, and he was sort of, as you'll hear, looking for where life would take him next and wasn't really sure where that would be. And in the end, Erskine was the answer, and he's been here for, as I say, many years, 25 years, as both a resident but also head of IT and a hugely important part of the Erskine Veterans charity, and has kept everybody connected as well, particularly the last 18 months. As we know, things have been different, and keeping those connections going with families has really been Bill's responsibility. So let's hear from Bill now, and welcome him to Erskine Veterans Radio. Bill McDowall, it's great to have you along. Thanks for joining us. Just start by telling us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from, and what was your route into the armed forces? I'm
originally from Greenock, so I'm a Greenock lad. Grew up there in the 60s and sort of 70s. I didn't really have any intention of joining the army initially. I went up to the army recruiting office in Port Glasgow with a friend of mine who wanted to join up, and somehow I ended up coming away thinking, yeah, that's what I want to do as well. So I joined up just before my 16th birthday. 3 weeks after my 16th birthday, I left home for the first time and travelled down to Surrey to the Guards Depot to start my training as a Scots Guardsman.
There are many that join the armed forces at a young age like that, at 16. How did that form you as a person, though? Because very influential years of your youth, I suppose, aren't they? And what did that do, and how did that make you into who you are today?
I know there's a lot of controversy that flies around about 16-year-olds joining the military. For me, I think I would have gone down a completely different path had I stayed in Greenock and grown up without a job and so on. What it installed into me was a sense of me, and a sense of worth, and a sense of being part of something bigger than me, and something that meant something. So I came away. I remember I'd come back home sort of on leaves to sort of visit my family. I would look at my old friends and my old streets, and I would think, I'm glad I did what I did. I'm glad, for me, it was the right move at the right time. I loved it. I would do it again if I was given the opportunity. And I think for a young man or a young woman who's looking for a career and just wants to find their place in something, when you meet some friends that you treasure for the rest of your life, then the army or any of the services for that is the place to be.
Being in the armed forces in the early 80s, there was plenty going on for the army, particularly Northern Ireland, and you did a tour of that. You were also stationed in London, and so you were doing ceremonial duties, I suppose, like looking after Buckingham Palace. You were wearing the scarlet tunic and the bearskin and all those kind of ceremonial pomp and circumstance, and probably appearing on a lot of holidaymakers' photographs at the time. But then things got serious, and you'd seen on the news that the Falklands conflict was brewing. And what are your memories of getting that call to be deployed to the Falklands yourself?
We were actually just on one of these, preparing for a major general's inspection of the barracks. That was Chelsea Barracks in London. We came into the barracks normally. I was married and had a son by then, and we were all called into the gymnasium. As saying the commanding officer was to address the battalion, and at that point we were then told that we were to form part of 5 Infantry Brigade with the Welsh Guards and the Gurkhas, and we were to immediately proceed to Brecon Beacons in Wales to, I guess, sharpen up our infantry and combat skills, and get some time working as a brigade with all the different units working together. So basically we were given like 24 hours notice pack up and be ready to move to Brecon. There was a buzz of excitement. I guess it's one of those things that comes with youth. You're excited about the prospect of the danger. You're excited about the prospect of actually, this is what we've trained for. This is, but there's also a kind of surrealism that's there, that you think this isn't really happening, but it is happening, and you're kind of excited that it's happening, but you've also got a little ball of fear in the pit of your stomach, especially as we'd seen it developing on the sort of news that we knew that action was actually happening and people were actually being injured and lives were being lost.
And you talk there about the excitement, the initial excitement, I suppose, but once you were actually reaching the Falklands, you were actually there. Did the mood change? Did your feeling change towards things that were about to potentially happen and indeed did happen?
The mood, we obviously went down on the QE2, which was some ship. If you're going to go down on the troop ship, then it has to be one like that. Wow! It was some journey down, crossing the equator for the first time. There was a big sort of party and sort of, a lot of hilarity, which kind of adds to the surrealism. Yeah, people run about the decks in shorts and things like that, and but we also had to do a lot of drills. Where they would basically turn off the lights below decks, and we would have to practice getting up onto the decks in case we had to sort of evacuate the ship. So there was lots of things like that sort of really brought home what we were doing. And as we got closer to the Falklands and things like that, there was overwatches where there was people watching, with binoculars for any incoming missiles or. So the seriousness of the situation that we were heading into. So there was also this thing this feeling that by the time we got there and landed, it would be over. Especially with the Paras and Marines on the case, we thought it's going to be over before we get there. So there was, there was some of that mood that we thought we basically, by the time we got there, we would be, guarding prisoners or just securing the islands, but the actual fighting would be finished, which obviously turned out not to be the case.
And what was the reality when you got there?
Well, obviously the Paras and Marines had made sort of advances. We landed at Fitzroy and started doing what the infantry does whenever it gets a piece of ground. We dig holes. We dig trenches, and then we fill them in again, and then we move on and dig some more trenches, and we carry heavy packs. So that was the reality. But again, we still got this thing. At the point when we landed, we still thought that we were not the rear guard, but the action was ahead of us. And then obviously we were moved round to Bluff Cove, where we spent about 8 hours overnight on flat bottomed landing crafts in the freezing cold, and these landing crafts were getting tossed about like nobody's business because they've been flat bottomed. They would rise up with a wave and then come crashing down, and the next wave would just come straight over the bow and just slam into you. And the water obviously was freezing cold, and you would get a collective gasp from everybody on board as the wave hit us. And that went on for say about 8 hours until we landed at Bluff Cove. And it wasn't like one of these scenes from a film where the ramp hits the beach and the guys come running off. I think by the time we'd spent that length in the freezing cold with the cold water, there wasn't too many of us that could have ran anywhere. It was. I mean, that was a hard night. But again, all the training that we'd done allowed us to come off those landing crafts, pick up our kit, and then carry on marching to where our designated spot was for digging in.
And you mentioned that you're digging in at Bluff Cove. Bluff Cove was the scene of what's ended up being the greatest loss of life among British forces in a single incident since World War II. 1/5 of British fatalities in the entire Falklands War happened in this air attack on the 8th of June in 1982, and your battalion are dug in there on that hillside.
A couple of days after we had landed at Bluff Cove, we were dug in on the sort of river that fed into Bluff Cove, when the Argentinian aircrafts who attacked the Sir Galahad and the Sir Tristram came flying down the ravine, the canyon, or whatever you call it. We were given an air raid warning red, which brought the whole battalion sort of, all our weapons were all manned and pointed at the sky. But unfortunately, by the time we had actually, I guess, got a round off, the jets were on us. They were too fast. They came flying straight over our positions, following the river, straight up into Bluff Cove. And then a few seconds later, we heard these massive explosions as the Sir Galahad, and we didn't know at that point it was the Sir Galahad and the Sir Tristram that was getting bombed. And we certainly didn't know that our friends from the Welsh Guards, because bear in mind the Guards, especially Scots, Irish and Welsh, all usually trained together. So there's a lot of the Welsh Guards that we all knew. We didn't realise at that point that they were still on the Sir Galahad that had just been bombed. And a few minutes later, the Argentinian aircraft came flying back up, following the river. And I guess they figured that since they'd travelled down that way on the way to attack the ships at anchor, that flying back would be again safe, because there was no enemy activity as far as they were concerned. Except by the time they came back up again, the whole battalion plus Royal Artillery attachments were ready for them. And I think that on that night, the battalion was credited with shooting down 4 Argentinian aircraft. Myself, I was manning one of the 50 caliber Brownings, and excuse me, we fired everything that we had into these sort of 5 aircraft as they came up, and some of the aircraft were almost level with us because we were flying up, and we were dug in on the hills so they came out pretty low, which gave us perfect targets. And there was people firing 9mm Brownings, and guys like myself who were on the 50 caliber Brownings. Everything went up, and I'm sure there's some statistic somewhere that we fired something like 18,000 rounds or something like that were fired up at these aircraft. And they took a pounding, and I'm sure that the official records say that we shot down 4 of them. By that point, and then once people were shouting about what had happened down on the beach, a lot of us sort of ran down onto the beaches to see what we could do. And some of the sights coming off the boats, the survivors was horrific, just horrific. The screams, the smell was something I don't think I'll ever forget.
And then less than a week after the Bluff Cove attack, the Scots Guards are making manoeuvres on Mount Tumbledown, which became one of the other big battles, and again another big loss of life and another horrific night to go through, but one that ultimately really led to the surrender of the Argentines over the Falkland Islands.
That was the night of the 13th and 14th of June. We lost 9 of our comrades killed in action in the battle, and 43 wounded in action to take Mount Tumbledown from the Argentinian Marines that were holding it. And what became probably the last full frontal bayonet assault done by the British Army. I say on the 14th of June, from the top of Mount Tumbledown, we could look down and see Port Stanley just in front of us. Um,
And there were some severe losses there for the Argentinians that night, wasn't there? That was a big...
Yes, yeah. And obviously once we'd held the peaks around Port Stanley, there was really nowhere for them to go. And the platoon I was part of the heavy machine gun platoon. So we were tasked with making our way into Port Stanley as the surrender had taken place. But they wanted some heavy machine guns actually in Stanley, obviously just in case things didn't go according to plan. So there was a platoon of the 2nd Battalion Scots Guards actually marched into Port Stanley on the day of the surrender, and I'm proud to say I was one of them.
And having gone through the experiences that you'd gone through over the course of that week, to be able to do that must have been quite some moment for you personally.
Yeah, it was, and there's a huge relief. Not so much because you don't want anything. I don't think it's not like you don't want anything to happen to you. There is a point, I think, when the bullets are flying, when everything's happening around you. You see that your friends you see that you've lost friends and you've had other friends wounded. I think the only thing that goes through your mind now and again is that I don't mind getting hit. I just don't want it to hurt too much.
I'm sure you would have rather not have had to go through the things that you had to go through. Our armed forces are always necessary and always stationed and ready to leap into action to defend our interests. But knowing what you know now, what is your feeling about war and all that it brings?
You see that war is not pretty, and it should always be the last resort, because governments can declare war, but it's men and women that have to go and fight it, and they're the ones that ultimately have to pay the price for that war, and they pay a high price.
Our special guest this week is someone who has been living and working here at Erskine for the past 25 years. Bill McDowall is head of IT and also a proud Erskine Cottage resident. What happened after the end of the Falklands conflict? The conflict is finished, victory has been declared, troops are returning home, and then how did life go?
We were given 6 weeks leave when we came back, and on day 2 or day 3, sort of went up to the Balham High Road where we sort of lived, went into one of the supermarkets, and I could hear people talking just about silly things, normal things. You know, the fact that they keep moving the stuff about on the shelf, you can never find what you want. Just kind of basic, normal, everyday things that people moaned about. And I exploded, literally just went completely, as my wife would describe, insane. Hurled the trolley around, and I thought, I just can't take this. You know, I don't understand what they're talking about. You know, I've seen my friends die. I've seen aeroplanes explode, all this, and you're talking about something that is like normal. You know, to me that wasn't normal. I just couldn't associate with that anymore. I felt I don't know. I felt I stepped outside a bubble, and and then a couple of years later, I started to have. Well, I had an injury to both my kneecaps on an assault course that never quite repaired. And then in 1987, I was given the option of. I was told I was no longer fit for military or for active service, but I could take a job in stores, or I could train to be a clerk or something like that, and I said no, that I couldn't do that. So at this time my battalion was stationed in Cyprus, which is where we initially were, but we were sent back to the UK, to the military hospital at Woolwich in East London, for some operations and some treatment on my legs, and it was from there that they decided that I would be medically discharged. And then I guess that's from me where I would say that my second story starts. We we went through the process of, or I went through the process of being sort of discharged, trying to find a house or somewhere to live. I didn't, we didn't have a lot of savings. Well, in actual fact, we had no savings. I was just a guardsman. I wasn't anybody of a significant rank or anything like that. Because we couldn't find a house, we had a visit one day from one of the family's officers and somebody from the MOD, who suggested that the best thing that what they could do is they would take us to Guildford County Court and sort of file for eviction. And so that way the local authority will have to house you. And bear in mind, I'd been in the army since I was 16 years old. I was used to following whatever was put down in front of us. So that's what we did. We were given 28 days to vacate the property. And we spent close to the next 18 months as a homeless family. We went from council bed and breakfast to council bed and breakfast. Sometimes the one we woke up wasn't the one we went to bed in that evening. We eventually got a flat, a little bed sit, in one of 3 block of flats, which were all for troubled and displaced families. And every night my wife and I would drag a chest of drawers to the front door, because at night they would try and kick doors in. And we stayed there for about 9 months. And that messed me up in ways I couldn't describe, to tell you. Everything I had done in the military, everything I'd done in Northern Ireland, the Falklands, everything I'd done seemed to amount to nothing. The times I'd stood on guard at Buckingham Palace with my scarlet tunic on and bearskin meant nothing. I thought, how did I get here? What did I do that got me here? I don't understand. A couple of years earlier, they were telling me I was one of the boys that put great back in Britain. How am I here? How am I living with threadbare carpets? How is me and my wife counting out 2 pences to walk into a shop to buy a loaf of bread? How does that happen? Then I remember sitting with my wife and saying to her, maybe it's me. In all honesty, maybe you would be better off without me. And that was really, really hard to take. But I'd say it took us 9 months, and it took a very awkward conversation when I went to, one of the times we went to the council in West London, to try and see where we were on the list and what was happening. And it was only because my wife then decided to make a big thing of it. That about 3 weeks later, we were offered a house, 3-bedroom house, which was great. We turned up, and the first thing my wife done was burst into tears because of the state of it. It was an address where I could maybe find a job, because every time I put down where I lived, pretty much no chance of getting a job when you tell them the address, because most people in the sort of area knew what those block of flats were for. And then I was given an opportunity to move back to Greenock. It was one of these things they have in councils where you could swap houses, swap council houses to another council area. And my wife, who was from London, as I said before, she said, well, why don't we just move back up to Scotland? Why don't we move closer to your family? You've got your sisters and you've got your brother, and you've got some sort of support up there, where down there we were kind of isolated. And that's what we did. We sort of moved back. We'd never actually lived in Scotland, so we moved to Greenock. Somebody suggested to me I had to go down to the local DSS office, as it was then, to sort of sign on. And the first thing they did was offer me an opportunity to go to college and restudy, or to study and for just try and give me a career. And at that point, I chose to go and study computers. But while I was there, one of the ladies said to me, "Have you ever spoke to somebody from war pensions or any organisation like that?" And I said no, that I had no contact with any military or anything since 1987 when I came out. I literally went straight through the cracks. So they got a lady from the war pensions to come to our home and speak to us. And although it was a nice place we were in Greenock, but it wasn't it wasn't a particularly great area. But again, it was a home. And this lady, Mary Morgan, who I'm eternally grateful to, asked if we'd ever heard of a place called Erskine Hospital. This bit always gets me a bit emotional, so I'll try and get it out as quick as I can. So she asked me if we'd ever heard of Erskine Hospital, and I said no, which I felt quite sad about, considering I live just down. I was brought up a few miles down the road from it. So she asked if it'd be okay if she made an appointment for maybe us to go in. She explained how they'd been sort of helping veterans, for many, many years, and there might be something there for us. And she came and picked us up and brought us into Erskine, the Erskine Hospital as it was then, to meet Colonel Bobby Steele, former Argyles, and Colonel Martin Gibson, former Royal Scots. And it's difficult to explain how I felt. There was a familiarity when we came in. It was just like an old barrack room with military memorabilia hanging from the walls, and people going about shouting, "Hey, Colonel this and Colonel that," and it's something I didn't realise that I'd missed as much as I had. Really. So after a long conversation with him, Colonel Steele said to us, "Look, we've got a 3-bedroom cottage in its own grounds with a nice garden, and it's yours if you want it." And it had been, I think, such a long time since somebody had done something that was nice, something positive. And we said, "God, of course we would." So we moved into a lovely detached cottage, and it was transformational. I can't describe it. It was. I would go down to the hospital, and so would my wife, and just to sit and have a coffee in the coffee room and listen to the banter. And my wife eventually, she got a job on the reception. Which again gave her something to be, that that wasn't just like a wife and a mum, but something to be herself. And so she got to know a lot of people, and I was kind of content that I was just going to sit up in our little cottage and, I don't know, put my feet up. And I think Erskine sneakily had another plan. I think there was another plan afoot. And the plan wasn't to let me sit up in the cottage, but the plan was to help me engage with the other veterans, which I did, and it was done very clever, and it was done very. It was like the Erskine stealth care system, where you were getting this care provided to you, and you didn't even know that it was happening. And I found myself getting little jobs in the appeal team, which was the team that was actually trying to raise the money to build the new Erskine home. And then one day, and I was at this point, I was also going through the college course. And to be honest with you, I think if I hadn't been at Erskine, I think the college course had been a lot more difficult. But just having that place of peace to come to helped a lot. I mean, I was never academic at school or anything like that. I have a condition similar to dyslexia. I always struggled going through school. I was in the sort of 60s. I was termed what you would probably call a dunce, because I struggled with reading and writing and some comprehension. One day, Keith Taylor, who's a former commander in the submarines, asked me if I wanted. He said, come here, I need to show you this, and took me down into one of the training rooms, and there was a load of compact computers and monitors and other equipment sitting about or lying about, still in the boxes. And he said, look, Compact, who's next door to us, has made a kind donation of all this equipment, and we don't know really what to do with it. At that point, the admin staff at Erskine were still using electric typewriters and so on, because this was sort of, 1997, 1998. So they were still into their electric typewriters. So when Keith asked me, do you know what to do with these? I said, yeah, I've got an idea. I said, plus I'm in touch with a couple of lecturers at the college, and I'm sure we could do something. And over the coming months, unpacked all the computers, ran cables underneath the Erskine Hospital, and created the Erskine network. And the rest, I guess, is history. 25 years on, the network doesn't just business-wise, it also helps our residents in their rooms connect. It helps them connect with their families all over the world. It means that when they come into the home, they can bring all their internet equipment in with them and connect to our network, and still have a level of independence that they had as they had in their own home. And if there's anything that we can do when residents come into the home from an IT point of view to make their stay with us any more enjoyable, and make sure that the technical side, then we do it. And that all started the day I came in here, and Colonel Steele asked me would I like to take a cottage.
Just sum up for us finally, Bill, what Erskine means to you, because we can hear how life-changing the whole experience has been. It really has turned your life around and given life a completely new meaning. But what does Erskine mean to you?
To me, people who know me at work will say, he's like Mr. Erskine. To me, working at Erskine isn't really a job. For me, it goes beyond that, because I know what Erskine is capable of. I know what it can do, and I know the transformation it can make to a veteran's life, and I want to make sure that Erskine is here for another 104 years if it's needed, and it will keep providing for our veterans for as long as veterans need us.
Well, Bill McDowall, thank you very much for sharing your story so openly and so honestly with us, both today and on Tuesday as well. One final question then. Want to play a song to play us out from this. If we were going to hand over the control of the music to you, Bill, what song would you like us to play to round off our chat?
There's one group. I'm a huge Kings of Leon fan.
Yeah.
Seeing them live, I think they're great. But one song especially, Comeback Story, is always, it's a bit like me, Mm-hmm. You keep pushing someone down, but they will keep coming back. And that's a song that's just the words of it always, it's the comeback story of a lifetime, is always struck